Okay. You get some water.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. While we wait for everyone to join us, if you could mute your microphones, that'd be great. And we will start in just about 2 minutes. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying a beautiful sunny day in Arizona. It's cooling down here in Detroit, and we're thrilled to be with you. Wish we could be there in person, of course. And we will get started in just about a minute. We are expecting about 80 people who are not all on yet, but that's okay. They'll be joining us. Just to let you know the way this is going to go, we will do a little intro. We'll thank our sponsors who make available to everybody across the country. We'll jump into a discussion with Stephen and Nolan, whom you will meet in a moment. And then we're going to have 2 breakout sessions, one for 7 minutes, one for 10 minutes. And we will broadcast the questions so that everybody knows what they're going to be. And we'll come back between each one and have a little debrief, and we'll finish with Q&A. So we're really excited that you're here. And I would like to start by inviting Ashley McAweel to do a little intro, since she has been working hard to plan this and get everybody here. So Ashley, I think you have to unmute.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We are really excited to have everybody here. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to join us today for the Civility Project. I do want to start by thanking our co-sponsors, which is ASU, the Optimism International, our Arizona Complete Health, U of A, and the Chamber of Commerce. We're so excited to have all of you here and participate. We hope you all can at least gain one thing from this, and I hope that you all enjoy. I'm not sure, we were going to have a couple words from Dr. Core, but I'm not sure if he's on yet. I don't see him. But we could go ahead and get started too. I know that Nolan and Stephen are busy men, and as renowned journalists have lots of things to do. So, but again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. I know, again, this is a busy time for all of us, so I hope you enjoy.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you for hosting this. I appreciate it.
Of course, our pleasure. Thank you.
So we're going to get started with a quick video from our sponsor. We're very grateful to Delta Dental and Huntington Bank for sponsoring this Great Lakes Civility Project. It makes it possible for us to bring this to you free of charge, to your organization and to each of you. So we want to just give them a nice shout out and thank them. And we'll play this quick little video from one of our sponsors, Delta Dental.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
All right, and we are grateful for our sponsors making this free of charge to people across the country. We've now worked with more than 3,000 people in the past year and a half, I think, to bring the Civility Project to all of you. And so we're going to start by introducing Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley. They'll tell you a little bit about themselves and where the Civility Project came from and what we're trying to do with this. So Stephen and Nolan, would you like to take it away?
Thanks, Len, and thanks to all our good friends now in Arizona. And we are just waiting for the day when we can come out there and do this in person with you all. February is preferable if you get an itch for another Civility Project session. We are available in February to come to Arizona. So thanks to all. Civility Project is like all good things or most good things in life. It really started with whiskey. I'm the conservative editorial page editor of the Detroit News. Steve Henderson was the conservative or the liberal or progressive, can't get that right, Steve, editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press. Two rival papers, and Detroit is in a unique town still, that it has two strong rival newspapers, one from one point of view, one from the other, gives our readers a lot of choice and causes them a lot of angst in the process. But anyway, he came as my counterpart at the Free Press, and right away people started putting us together on radio, on TV, and in public events, to sort of watch us scrap, watch us fight. And we did a whole lot of that. We found out we were good at it and enjoyed it. We also found out something else about each other. I'm from Kentucky. Steve worked in Kentucky at the beginning of his career, and we both have a profound appreciation, if you will, of bourbon. And so once we discovered that and started, sharing bourbon and bourbon evenings, nothing else mattered really. And so we learned early on, I think, in our relationship, to disagree passionately and to have some pretty good and lively exchanges, sometimes heated, and still be able to walk away and go and sit down and have a bourbon together and talk about other stuff. So that caught the attention of a lot of people. In this day and age, it's unusual to see people who have stark disagreements and very passionate disagreements be fast friends. And that's what we became. And so people started asking about it and wondering about it. And so we started bringing together groups of our friends, his friends, my friends, people from the left and right, who normally wouldn't socialize together, into these bourbon nights in Metro Detroit. And it became very popular. And, from that grew this Civility Project, thanks to, some philanthropy from Delta Dental and others who wanted to see the discussion go broader. So what we've been doing is going out and talking to groups like yourself, telling them, one, our story, and also offering some tips about how you can do this in your personal lives, and encouraging you to do so. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, so Nolan is right about the sort of, I think, unlikely nature of, the relationship that we have, given our profoundly different ways of seeing things. When we first started, appearing together in different places around town and arguing in public, and then started to figure out that we actually had a lot in common and liked each other. There was a lot of curiosity about that. I mean, there were a lot of people who couldn't quite figure out what we were up to, or why we liked each other. I think both of us heard a fair amount of pushback in our friends circles, professional circles, about why are you hanging out with that guy? Why do you like that guy? And that was in the late 2000s. I mean, that's between like 2007 and 2010. And the reason we started the Civility Project is really about the way things have changed since then, and the really bitter way in which people have started to disagree with one another, and whether they didn't then. I mean, we got a lot of pushback then, the idea that we could be friends or that we wouldn't be bitter enemies. Over time, that has turned into just absolute hatred among lots of people that we know, of people who who don't agree with them. And fast forward to 2016 and the presidential contest that year, what you saw, I think, was a fundamental breakdown in the very idea of constructive dialogue between people who disagree, and a decision on a lot of people's parts that that this was kind of like a war, and that you had to win and you had to vanquish the other side. It's a very dangerous trend in a democracy. Democracy really depends on us being able to work through problems together, to figure out ways to take into account many different points of view and come up with a way forward. That doesn't work if both sides believe that the other is evil, if both sides refuse to kind of take most people at their word and believe that they're arguing in good faith. And if most people are unwilling to back away from their own beliefs just a little bit to understand where somebody else is coming from, just to see what the other side really is about. And so we started the Civility Project as a way to say, we've got to lift this up. We've got to be able to have people count on this as a way to keep things going, as a way to solve our problems. The last 5 years, I think, have only reinforced the importance of what we're doing. I mean, we're now at a point where the people in their workplaces can't talk with one another, people in their neighborhoods don't talk with one another, people in their own families are finding it difficult to have constructive disagreement, to be able to say, it's okay that we can't see eye to eye on this issue, but there's a bigger relationship between us that's more important than that disagreement. And so we've been talking to groups like yours now for about 1.5 years, trying to give people the opportunity to see how they can do more of that in their own lives.
And so why is this important? Why does it matter? I mean, Steve touched on it. People aren't talking to each other, and they need to. That's a funny colored bourbon, by the way, Steve. I haven't tried that batch yet. But anyway, why is it important to us? Why is it important overall? I mean, Steve hit on it. People just aren't talking. They're bunkered up. And it's not just our political leaders who are bunkered up and fighting. It's everyday people in their everyday lives. Before the last election, I saw a poll, 75% of people said they never talked to somebody on the other side of the political aisle. They didn't have a friend who didn't think the same way they did politically. And you can say, well, that's okay, but we less fighting, we all agree, we'll all get along. Except when you create that environment, it is very easy to assign negative, hurtful qualities to the person whose views are opposite or different from yours. And one of our guiding principles at the Civility Project is that everybody comes to their opinions the same way. They take the facts and the information, they apply their values, their experiences, and they form an opinion. And if it's different from yours, as Steve said, doesn't make them evil, doesn't make them stupid, doesn't mean they're out to destroy the country, just different. And the key to civil conversation and discussion and meaningful relationships with people across the divide is that you try to understand what those experiences and values are. And that's why we do these little exercises that Lynn's going to introduce in a few minutes to get people talking to each other about who they are rather than what they believe. Steve and I's relationship could have easily gone the other way, but for two things: trust and respect. I trust Steve. I worked with somebody from his newspaper in a similar setting before he came, and it was miserable. I didn't trust her, never knew when she was going to try to embarrass me, try to take a cheap shot. And that's no fun when you're on television or radio or before a group and somebody tries to yank the rug out from it on you just to score points. I came very quickly comfortable that Steve wasn't going to do that, and I wasn't going to do that to him. No winning was not so important to do that. And the other thing was respect. You know, I didn't agree with almost anything he wrote when he first came to Free Press and started writing, still today, most of the time. But I respected the skill and the thought that went into his writing. He's a beautiful writer, a Pulitzer Prize winner, an intellectual who puts a lot of thought into his opinions and a lot of work into his writing. And I came to appreciate that, even though I disagreed. And I found it causing me to sharpen my own views. You know, I knew I had to be prepared to counter those arguments that were well thought out, well reasoned, and you know, it made his work made my work better in my mind. And so that's what we're trying to get to with the Civility project and with these little exercises. It is to develop a respect first and a familiarity first before you take on the hard work of conversations. And these conversations are hard work, and they come with some risk, and they can be unpleasant. But if we're ever going to get to the point where we become a more united people, we've got to start in our personal lives and our personal conversations to engage with people we may rather avoid in most circumstances.
Thanks, you guys. I really appreciate that introduction. I did put in the chat a link to the Storycorps interview that involves Stephen and Nolan, if you guys want to check that out, which really started a lot of this. And before we go into our breakout rooms, I do want to ask Stephen and Nolan just to give us a quick little introduction into, you know, where do we begin if we want to build civility? Who do we choose to do this with? How do we go about it? Maybe give us just a couple minutes and I'll set up those breakout groups, and then we can talk about what we're going to talk about in there.
Well, if Steve would tell the Storycorps story, I think that would be a good way to get to that. Yeah.
So about 10 years after Nolan and I started working together and then had become friends, the NPR project called Storycorps came to Detroit. And for those of you who might not necessarily be familiar, Storycorps is an effort by NPR to collect American stories about American relationships, right? People go and they take somebody important to them down to a little Winnebago where they set up a studio. You sit in there for an hour with that person and talk about the relationship you have with that person. A lot of people do it with relatives or other loved ones. People do it with close friends. When they came to Detroit, I decided that the person I wanted to take down to Storycorps was Nolan, against all odds, to sit in a Winnebago with him for an hour. And I told him when we got there that what I wanted us to talk about was not what we normally talk about, which is politics or policy. We have a debate about things that are going on. I said, I wanted us to go and tell each other where our ideas about politics and policy come from. What made Nolan Finley into a conservative? What were the experiences that he had both early in his life and throughout his life that led him to believe that, that's the best way to solve problems is through a conservative approach. And then I said I wanted to tell him what things I experienced throughout my life that made me a liberal or a progressive. And so we sat there for an hour and both told essentially our backstories to one another. We'd known each other for 10 years at that point, and I don't think either of us had heard much of what we'd heard about the other one that day before that point. But what it did was change the way that I think we interact with one another about our points of view. I think because now we both really understand where we're coming from, where the other one is coming from, and why they believe the things that they do, that it's a lot easier to accept those points of view, even if we still really disagree. I mean, there's nothing about our disagreements that changed, but I think the way that we we assess one another, the way we assess one another's arguments, the way we think about one another really changed because of that. And so that was also a big part of developing the Civility project. We figured if that happened for us in that setting and under those guidelines, that kind of conversation, why couldn't it work for other people? Why couldn't other folks who who have political disagreements sit down and have a conversation about where their ideas come from, how they have arrived at the things that they believe? And so that is, when we were first starting out, of course, we were doing this in person. It was before the pandemic. And we were asking people to get together before we all got together, get together in pairs and talk about those kind of things. And so that's what we are attempting to do with some of these exercises over Zoom, is get people into smaller groups and to talk about the things that underlie the things that they believe as a way to better understand one another.
And no fighting, biting, or scratching when you get into these groups, please.
So I'm going to put the question in the chat right now, but I'm also going to broadcast it to the rooms, and it's just going to be a small group, no pressure. Nobody has to share when they get back, but we invite you to if you want to. But the idea is to get to know one another behind your beliefs, just sort of, why do you think the way you do? What motivates you to a certain position? And we're going to do again two. So the first one, I put the question in the chat, I'll broadcast it to you. And the second one will be more about your personal background that informs your beliefs today. So, and then we'll have a little Q&A at the end. So you can ask all of your questions to get the nitty gritty on Stephen and Nolan. So without further ado, I'm going to put everybody into the breakout rooms, and I will look forward to seeing you back here in about 7 minutes. Welcome back. We'll wait for everyone to pop back in. I always think it's very funny seeing everybody just pop back in. It's like magic. Welcome back, everybody. Lots of loud. Maybe mute for now, but I'm going to ask you to pop in if you want to contribute a comment. So you'll have the option to unmute. But for now, let's all mute so we don't have too much feedback. And so what we'd like to do is to hear a little bit about how that went, what it was like. Did you have any sort of aha moments or groundbreaking sort of connections? Who wants to share a little bit about how that conversation went? And you can either unmute and jump in, or you can use under reactions at the bottom of your screen, you can do the raise hand, and I would be happy to call on you too.
Could we perhaps use the chat as well, in case it's free to talk? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to.
Hi, Lynn. This is Daniel Corey. I just want to share that our group, the commonality was the real importance of our childhood and our upbringing and the circumstances in which we were brought up, the profound impact of our parents, maybe for good or bad, but just the real strong influence of parents. And a real quick a note to Nolan. I know you want to come out in February, but the hotels are so much cheaper in July. We can get you a smoking deal out here in July.
I'll keep that in mind.
Daniel, that's a great point. And as you were saying that, tons of people were shaking their heads. Yes, I understand. So it sounds like, parental influence is a huge impact for a lot of people here. Thank you for that. Who else wants to share what happened in your group?
I think in Yuma, Arizona, like being on a border town, something that was consistent in our group is that there's cultural, aspects to the way that we are. I'm a Hispanic male, and Hispanic individuals are usually very conservative and very strict and very Catholic. And a lot of those qualities transcended into my adulthood, but I've also evolved and grew my own opinions as well. But something that I noticed about civility is that I don't understand why people are so reactionary these days. Immediately reactive. And so we talked about education in our group, and I feel that education solves ignorance, and it's the best thing to do is to educate yourself before you react in any situation.
Great point, Oscar. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Sarah mentioned in the chat that her group's commonality was their experience of class or socioeconomic status. So parental influence, neighborhood, cash flow, those were all factors that influenced positions as well. Thanks for that, Sarah. Anybody else want to share what happened in their group? Mandy?
Oh, not necessarily sharing what happened in our group, but just that both, having this conversation with a colleague or coworker felt a little uncomfortable at first, to be honest. So it's just an observation that it doesn't happen. We don't have these kind of conversations with coworkers at all. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that's kind of what's going on, and it's new to us. So we kind of stumbled through a little bit, I think.
Did you enjoy it? Can you see where you might find value in it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, Mandy. I really appreciate that. And thanks for participating in it. I could see some people would say, I'm not going to do it. So kudos to all of you for being willing to venture into that territory. You're right. It's not common. So thank you. Bobby, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to echo a little bit off of what Mandy said, because we were in the same group, and the first probably minute to a minute and a half maybe was kind of like the very uneasy feeling. So I felt like we had to kind of push ourselves into going through to actually discussing this. But I think what I learned from our group really quick was that me being someone, in case y'all can't tell, this is not a normal human accent that I have here. So somebody growing up in the southeastern part of the United States, and then somebody like Mandy in California, actually how much we do have in common.
Wait a minute, is that what you all call yourself, humans?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's convenient.
Yeah. So that was a couple of the things that I took away, but I definitely will say the same that Mandy said, with us being colleagues here, and it was very uneasy to start to try to have that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. Vanessa mentioned in the chat, our group discussed the importance of remaining neutral when it comes to political views due to our public positions. Really good point. And then another comment said, not really having a place to call home politically, that both sides seem to be at the extreme. So yeah, I can imagine a lot of people finding common ground saying, I'm not one extreme or another. Where is my middle ground? Where are my people? So that's a really good point also. Does anybody else want to offer any insights or thoughts after this first conversation?
We had someone in our group that was really struggling with the kind of animosity that came along this last, that's been building up these years. And I think that that's, trying to get back to a place where they feel like they could agree to disagree with some of the very passionate subject matters that are being out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good point.
Good point.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody else?
I think a couple people in our group echoed that, my party's left me, I don't have a political home. And I think that it's not just in politics either, at least in my experience. There's things that may have been your bedrock for most of your life, and now they've changed significantly. It's very hard to believe sometimes what people are supporting and what they believe. And it makes it very difficult to know, how do you deal with that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. All right, so we do a second breakout group in the same group. So you'll see familiar faces, and we give a little more time because people usually say that they just got going and then the group ended. And so we want to give you a little more time just to chat. So this one is hopefully a little bit easier, and also you've laid the groundwork already. But we'll talk about what things in your background or your value system bring you to your beliefs. And so just experiences you may have had, or the values you were raised with, or whatever details like that really play a large part in informing your perspectives. So again, go ahead.
And Len, if I can add this time, if you can ask each other questions, so you move to that next, next part of the conversation.
Absolutely. And, really just take it where you want it to go. Just explore. It's a safe place. And the breakout rooms are not recorded. So whatever you say is sacrosanct. It stays there. So I'm going to put you back into the rooms. We'll have 10 minutes and I'll broadcast the question. I also just put it in the chat, and we'll come back and chat a little bit, and then we'll finish up with some Q&A to Stephen and Nolan. So have a good time, and I'll see you guys soon. Welcome back again. Everybody should be popping back in now. There it is, all the magic. All right, welcome back again. So hopefully that was a little bit of a deeper foray into getting to know one another. And as we did before, we'd love to hear from anybody who would like to share some thoughts about how that went, or any insights or revelations you had, connection points, anything at all. And feel free to use the chat or to raise your hand and type in with voice.
I'll go ahead and start, Lynn.
Sure, thanks, Ashley.
Our group is really good in communicating, and we kind of have some commonalities, one of which is being the use of the word extreme. A lot of things have been to the extreme. One example was given by one of my partners here, the black ants and the red ants, and together, they're fine, but when you shake them up, they start fighting to the death. And that's where we were kind of like, yeah, the extremes, and we have to be very careful because we're not doing a lot of the fact checking. And then another partner in the room also said a lot of different generations where the older generation will say something but feel like they should be able to get away with it because it's their generation. And then also just the media and how a lot of it can be bought now, especially with Facebook ads, Twitter ads. They can buy their views and their likes and getting the information out there, which is not always necessarily the correct information. But I think just in our group, with the different views that we have, finding those commonalities was really reassuring because we all want the same thing, which is the unity and be able to trust one another. So I really just wanted to thank my group because it was a really good discussion and I really enjoyed it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you.
Sounds like a wonderful goal. We all want the same things, unity and trust. I mean, who can disagree with that, right? Who else might like to share a little bit of their perspective or how their conversation went?
I just observed that I think the members of my group could pretty much sort out the nation's problems because, you know, we agree on the existence of objective facts, and we can, you know, I was just wondering if other groups had that same sense.
Ed, you have my vote.
Yeah, we're nominating you, Ed. Please take over the conversation nationally. We would love it.
Okay.
Do other people resonate with that idea? Did you have the same experience in your groups?
Lynn, the folks in my group talked a lot about listening, and I promised them that when we came back at some point, we'd get Steve to talk about the art of meaningful listening since he articulates it so well. So let's not forget that.
Okay. Yeah, we will get back to those conversations in just a few minutes. I just wanted to see if anybody else would like to share some insights or thoughts about their experience.
I thought it was interesting that there's so much that we stay away from, particularly in a work environment. That's kind of what we talked about, is we stay away from talking about things within a work environment. And there's some benefits to that. I mean, there's some concerns about things that may come up, but on the other hand, just in that short time together, you find all these commonalities that could bring you together and give you that trust that you could have those conversations. And so I just found that interesting that colleagues who work that didn't know things about each other that would help the conversations. And it was so easy to get those to come out, but they haven't come out in the workplace.
I love that, Paul, that it was so easy. You know, maybe it's just the perspective and the approach. Like, we want to come in and hear each other. And so it's a different setting than normally. And maybe that's a great reminder. Thank you.
I also, in our breakout group, my approach that I take towards communicating with people with differences is I'm not necessarily have to agree with them, but just acknowledgement. You know, just acknowledging that those are their beliefs and those are their standards, and, you know, just being able to be an active listener and to acknowledge their feelings or beliefs. You know, often those conversations will end very positively, you know, just because I don't agree with them. You know, I have so many friends that are like online on Facebook and Instagram, and, you know, if one particular person is spewing off about the president or something, they're like, oh, I'm going to delete that person, or I'm just going to, you know, get rid of them. But I think that that's so counterproductive because, you know, they are a person, their political beliefs aren't their, you know, their own self. Yes. But I always, you know, I don't ever comment or go, you know, but I at least acknowledge what their feelings are, what their thoughts are, and that they are heard. And, you know, that displaying that respect to people and that, you know, common courtesy, I oftentimes will get that same respect back when I have my own opinions.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. Actually, you guys are hitting on all of Stephen and Nolan's points. I mean, listening is super important, and what you come to the table with, but also acknowledging the other person and really hearing what they have to say. Those are super important elements of building civility. I just want to mention a few of the comments in the chat, and thank you to everybody who is adding something there. But one person said, we talked about the fact that we sit in meetings with each other at work every day, but don't take enough time to get to know each other personally. And she thinks that Arizona Western College should implement a coffee with a colleague program. So Ashley, can we make that happen? Get that going.
Can I build off of that Mandy's point about that? Because I think that goes a long way to when we recognize people as people who exist more than just behind a screen or as, you know, an entity or a label. It's really hard then to make assumptions about that person, especially when you hear these extreme whatever views being spouted by the media about what you should think about XYZ. And you see them as a real person, and you see them as a spouse and a parent and a caring educator or member of the community. It's really hard then to vilify them and to ascribe those assumptions about that label. And then it makes it easier to say, here's someone I disagree with, but this doesn't mean that this is a hateful, vile, awful person. And you I don't even think it has to be about politics. Just conversations and humanizing one another goes a long way to then be able to have these conversations, because I would gather that most of the people who signed up for the previous civility opportunity and this one today are most likely people who are generally civil and can engage in discourse like this and are willing to listen and hear different viewpoints. So then when you expand that to a wider community where you might interact with people, because that came up in our group conversation, how do you respond when someone is really attacking on a personal level, even sometimes a particular viewpoint you might have?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Julia. I appreciate it. I think this is a great time to actually pose your question to Stephen and Nolan so that we can have these conversations and answer some of those important questions. So Stephen and Nolan, do you guys want to maybe take that question, and then we can get to the listening and some of the other questions in the chat?
Sure, go ahead, Nolan.
Well, you know, there are questions that, or there are conversations that get so volatile and so hateful that you just have to walk away from them for the moment. And that's why I think it's important before you sit out to establish some ground rules so you can guard against that, things getting ugly, if you will. And those, you know, those ground rules are the things we talked about at the beginning, that we are going to, this conversation is going to be civil. We're going to keep our tones at a civil level. We might get passionate, but we're going to come in with the understanding that we have an honest goal for this exchange. I'm not trying to convert you. You're not trying to convert me. Believe me, I would be a bald old man right now if I had spent the last 10 years thinking I could convert Steve to my way of thinking. It's just never going to happen. So what is the value in that exchange? The value then, I'm not going to convert him, but I am interested in hearing what he thinks and hearing his ideas, particularly when they're different than mine, because I might learn something. So set an honest goal, both people, set an honest goal for the conversation. And that goal is not, again, conversion, and it's not winning. If you think you're going to win a conversation, don't bother. If your goal is to be able to walk away and say, oh, I smoked that person, don't bother. It's not worth it. You have to have honest, intentional goals going in to derive some value over a conversation that might get contentious.
Yeah, I think that you know, there's always this very serious question about, you know, whether somebody respects you enough to even engage in the civil conversation. And I think right now we see more and more of the proclivity of some people to decide that they don't respect somebody because of who they are, or what race or creed or color they are. I always say that civility is not a mandate to tolerate disrespect. I don't believe that. I think if somebody doesn't respect you, you can't necessarily reach them with a civil conversation. But I am always left with this question then kind of hanging in the air. So in a democracy, there aren't ways to disqualify people who we don't like. You know, that person who doesn't respect you has the same opportunity to vote that you do. They have the same rights to free speech and to political influence that you do. So where does that leave us if we are, you know, if we are saying, well, we're not going to engage with people like that? And I guess I'm asking that question in all sincerity. I don't know. You know, I don't know how you account for, you know, the elements in our society right now that seem not to want to respect the bounds of the democracy we have. You know, my question when people say, well, I'm just done with them, or I'm not going to engage with them, my question is always, well, okay, well then what? What do we want to do? How do we, you know, how do we manage as a country by disqualifying, you know, people the same way that they're disqualifying us? I don't know what the answer is, but I think that there are more and more people who fall into that category, and that's one of the big problems that we have, right? That we're not able to figure that out, to move beyond what is not acceptable, to get to a place where we can actually talk with one another. And again, I'm certainly not saying that anybody has an obligation to just countenance that kind of thing, to just take it. I don't believe that. And I believe that you know, we ought to be fighting to stop the systemic disrespect of you know, of certain cultures, of certain races, those kind of things. But what do we do with the people who want to do that? I guess I don't really know anymore.
Well, you know, one thing I would add, or just throw in there, is understand that that person on the other side of the table may feel you don't respect his or her views as well. And I think we need to guard against our own smugness, our own self-righteousness. The late, great Democratic Congressman from Michigan, John Dingell, was as progressive as they come, but he also represented in his district the auto industry, Detroit's automakers, which put him at odds with environmentalists. And I was with him one time when the environmentalists were just wearing him out, and he looked at me and he says, they think they're the only ones who talk to God. And so be aware that, you know, these folks also have very strong opinions that they think you don't respect. And, you know, let's not make, you know, let's check our self-righteousness and our smugness at the door and not make assumptions about people. I mean, and let's not decide we hate people before we really know who we are. One of my favorite stories to tell on Steve in these gatherings is the time he and I were both up at a Republican state convention at a resort in northern Michigan. And after the day's activities, we were sitting at the bar as usual and having a personal conversation. I walked away and I was stopped by these two Republican women who said, "Oh my God, how can you sit there with him? How can he be your friend? He's so awful. We just hate him." And those words just struck me. And I said, "You hate him? How can you even know you hate him if you ever talked to him?" And they said, "Oh, no, we've never talked to him." I said, "Well, my seat's open. I'd invite you to go over there and just strike a conversation with him." It was 2 hours later, I had to pull him away from him. And they said, "Oh my God, he's just wonderful." Now, nothing about Steve had changed in that time, but what they knew about him as a person had changed from what they thought they knew about him. And I think, you know, we've got to get beyond that those assumptions.
So I know we want to talk about listening, but we also have some great questions in the chat. So I wanted to throw those your way really quickly, guys. The first one is, how do institutions stand up to the social media mob and survive politically? And it's an interesting day to hear that, because Facebook and Instagram were out for hours today, which is like unheard of. And it was really peaceful in my world. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Social media mob, how do you survive politically? What are your thoughts?
So, it's funny. I am addicted to social media in a really particular way. I mean, I can't take my eyes off it most of the time. I'm constantly checking Facebook and Twitter, but I missed the outage today. I mean, I just completely missed it. I don't know whether I just wasn't noticing that it wasn't refreshing somehow, or wasn't doing something, or people weren't talking to me, but I didn't notice it until I started to see stories about it.
4 hours that it was out, which is unheard of.
How did we survive?
But I am, when we do these sessions, I think both of us talk about the real negative influence that social media is playing in dialogue these days, and in political dialogue in particular. It is not, I'm always careful to say that it's not the fault. I don't believe it's the fault of the platforms themselves. I mean, I think the owners of those platforms, the creators of those platforms, could be doing a little more to discourage bad behavior and encourage good behavior, but it's actually not really their responsibility. They are providing a platform that we are shaping and that we are deciding how we're going to use, and it's our it's the deterioration of our interpersonal communications that we see reflected on Facebook and on Twitter. We want to blame Facebook and Twitter for it, and I think that's probably not really what's going on. There is a real strain in our culture about choosing our friends in a way that reflects our political outlook, which of course Facebook and Twitter make possible, or more possible, to create these kind of bubbles. But I think that just is who we are right now, is that people are more comfortable in spaces where everybody agrees, where they don't have to see people with different ideas. And then the idea of that active choice about who's in your circle and not now becomes a premium idea in the social media circle. So somebody says something you don't like, or reflects a political point of view that you find objectionable, and you can block them, right? Or you can delete them as a friend. There's like a very simple way, quick way to eliminate somebody, as punishment for what they believe or what they said. Then, of course, it's never enough just to do it. You have to announce that you did it on social media. Right? I blocked that person. I'm never talking to him again. I put that person on mute, and then everybody else cheers. It's a self-reinforcing exclusivity that I think runs counter to the idea of civil dialogue across differences. Now, the place that Nolan and I probably disagree the most about social media is that I think this is a reflection of its infancy. I mean, social media is really, really new if you think about it. 10 years ago, almost nobody was on Twitter. More people were on Facebook at that point. But even that was, these are all platforms in their infancy, and every technological leap forward in the way that we communicate with each other has been greeted by pretty bad behavior initially. Telegraph is a great example of that. Telegraph was used for horrible things in the run-up to the Civil War, and was one of the things that spread misinformation, especially throughout the South, about what was going on in Washington. That led to a lot of the things that Southerners ended up deciding that they were going to do. But then by the time of the First and Second World Wars, it's a tool you couldn't imagine not having at all. I mean, it is a vital communication tool. Radio and television, same thing. I mean, these were garbage mediums when they were introduced, and have, they've grown up. You know, they've become more sophisticated as they've aged, as we've become more accustomed to what they can do for us. I suppose somebody could probably argue with me that television is still a garbage medium, but I actually don't think so. There is garbage on TV, but overall, I think it's again, it's a tool that we couldn't imagine civil society without at this point. So I think social media has a chance still to grow up and redeem itself and become something really different from what it is. But it's, again, it's up to us to do it. We have more control over this medium than we've ever had over any other medium in history. It really is a reflection of us in a way that other tools are not. And it's our interactions that need to mature in order to make sure that they're functioning in a way that builds society up instead of tearing it down.
But don't you guys think that there's a difference in being behind a screen at a distance than face having these conversations?
Yeah, of course. It's you know, instead of becoming a very personal platform, it's sort of impersonal and put up a shield in terms of the protections against civil behavior. But I'd like directly to address you know, Damien's question about how to institution the social media mob. My answer is they've got to just start standing up and recognizing that the mob it may be loud, but it's not necessarily all that large in numbers. And we've, as institutions, we've got to say, we got to say, whether it's your college or our newspaper or somebody else, we've got to be able to say, we stand for certain values. And among those values are the idea of redemption, evolution, and that we are not going to erase somebody from our organizations and from public life for something they said or did 30 years ago. We believe people can change over time. And if people demonstrate that they have, we should just tell the mob, you know, stand down, because we're standing up. And there's too little, you know, I think if you haven't heard Jon Stewart's, or what's the guy on HBO? John has the talk show. Help me out on HBO, the late night talk show host.
I actually don't know.
Is it Bill Maher?
Bill Maher's the only guy I watch. Yeah.
I don't know where I got John, but Bill Maher's had some wonderful dialogues on this. And, you know, the idea that we're going to take somebody out of the workplace or out of the public square because at 17 or 18, they said something stupid. Who didn't? You know, and we've got to embrace that idea of redemption throughout our society. And I think that would go a long way to dealing with this devil child, as Steve described it.
So we have a question, an anonymous question, that some people in the breakout groups were struggling a bit with the idea that revealing their political views could negatively affect the interactions with colleagues after they go back to work tomorrow. So do you have any insights about how to navigate that? And, you know, we've done these types of sessions for workplaces and, you know, organizations where people work together. So what advice do you have for revealing what you think politically, but then continuing to work together in a way that that is comfortable?
Well, I mean, we talk a lot about the idea of this project being aimed at convincing people to work in the spaces that they can control. There's so much about what's going on right now that I think makes people feel really helpless about the division that exists in our country. I mean, if you watch, a mob storming the Capitol on the day that they're supposed to certify election results, I think it's really hard to watch that and think, well, what can I do, to reach those people? What can I do to have a dialogue with those people? But there are people that there are people that you interact with all the time who have different ideas than you do and who have different thoughts about all these things than you do. And so we really are trying to get people to think about where those spaces are and who those people are, and to start there. You start in your neighborhood, or you start in your school, or you start in your church or your workplace, trying to identify places where there are people who maybe have different ideas that you're not aware of or familiar with or comfortable discussing with that person, and you start to try to build a relationship with that person, a better kind of relationship that would allow you to have these difficult conversations. And that's really what we're talking about is, Nolan and I, when we disagree and when we have arguments, there is no holding back. This is not like an effort to establish some sort of, kumbaya session where everybody just feels good about what they think or how they see things. I mean, when we argue, we really go after it, and we get after each other. And sometimes it gets really, really bitter, not just passionate, but angry. But the reason that we're able to do that is that we do have this bigger, sort of broader relationship, and that both of us knows, I think, that no matter what we argue about or how hard we argue about it, that what's more important is that broader relationship, that we're not damaging that by disagreeing. And to get to that place, you really do have to establish that trust, that relationship. And I think you do that, again, in the places that you can control. You do that in the places where you interact all the time. I think increasingly it's in families. I mean, the number of people I come across, on a weekly basis who call into the radio show I host, for instance, and say, I can't talk to my uncle, or I can't talk to my brother anymore. And now we're coming up again on the holidays. How many people avoid certain places, with their family on the holidays, or not invite certain people? That's becoming more common. And I think that is the most intimate place that you can make this kind of change, is with people you don't have a choice really but to be associated with, born into that space. You start there. I have an uncle. I tell a story all the time. I have an uncle and an aunt who are the most conservative people you have ever met. They spend all day watching Fox News or listening to conservative radio, and they spend all night on email sending crazy stuff to the rest of the family about what they saw. It's unbelievable. But through all of that, I've always maintained the ability to have a dialogue with them. I mean, they drive me crazy. They say stuff that I'm just flabbergasted by all the time. But I've determined that I won't let that damage the relationship. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of back and forth. But I think if each of us were doing that, we'd be in a better place in terms of dialogue and disagreement and working through working through problems.
And particularly with family. And, you know, I tell the story, the first Easter after Donald Trump was elected, we're sitting there having dinner, Easter dinner, and my brother-in-law barges to the door and sits down at the table. And he says, "Don't anybody mention Donald Trump to me." He said, I've been run off 2 places already. This is my last chance to get Easter dinner." And so, you know, what you have to remember is these people, particularly within a family, yeah, they have political views that drive you crazy. And they have political views that you might find just completely unacceptable. But when the stuff hits the fan, in those dark moments, when you need family, what these people feel politically is not going to matter. What, you know, the fact that they love you and are willing to be there when you need them is what's going to matter. And if you keep that in mind while you're talking with them or while they're driving you crazy, it might temper some of that bile that's building up listening to them.
We can probably apply that to the workplace too.
Yeah.
Have other common ground with. I know we're running out of time. Art, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Not so much a question, but more a statement. I think it was asked about how to handle these situations in the workplace with political ideas. I just always had the thought that if I work with, first of all, it's not the place to be discussing certain subjects like politics. If I see somebody that I know at a rally that's opposite of my position, I'm not going to address it with them the next day. I mean, I'm still going to work with them. We have something to accomplish within our 8 hours. And I think there's a lot of times it's the reverse judgments where somebody states a belief or a lifestyle, and then I might get asked or attacked like, "Hey, so now you don't like me?" And I'm like, "I never said anything." Like, you know, everybody has their judgment one way or the other. So ultimately my thought process was certain things probably shouldn't just be discussed at the workplace.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's also, if it's somebody you've worked with for a long time and you have a rapport, it could be a great opportunity to go out after work and have a conversation and just get to know each other better and say, "I'm really curious, why do you feel this way? I'd like to tell you how I feel." And maybe that's a great time for Stephen to talk about listening. We can close with that notion, but that art of listening is so crucial to building civility. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we talk about kind of core principles with civility all the time, and I think the one that you know sits at the top of the list is listening. And when we say that word, you know, we're talking about something a little different, I think, than the way most of us think of that word in our daily lives. I think for most of us, listening simply means that we're not talking. That if I'm allowing you to speak, then I'm listening. But I think if you really think about it, frequently when that's true, we're still in our own head while the other person's talking. We're thinking about what we just said, or we're thinking about what we're going to say as soon as that person stops talking, like what we're going to say next. Or we're judging what that person is saying while they're talking instead of really trying to understand what they're saying or where they're coming from. You know, I think we are talking about a more active form of listening where you're really investing in what the other person is saying, why they're saying it, and trying to understand, you know, where they're coming from. And I have a couple tests for this for myself. You know, for starters, you know, when I'm listening to somebody and they're done talking, I kind of ask myself if I could repeat back what they said, you know, before I even started talking. Could I say or make the arguments that they were just trying to make, you know, not in a mocking way, but in a sincere way, you know, really reflect where they were coming from and what they were trying to communicate. And if I can, then I kind of think I was actually listening. The other test I have is whether I have questions for them about what they've said. How curious am I really about what they're saying or why they're saying it or where they're coming from. If I'm not at all inquisitive about what they said, then I maybe was not listening quite the way that I thought I did. And these are things that I do on the radio show that I host every day. We get a lot of calls, you know, and I try really hard to be able to invest in what the callers are saying, even if I disagree, just for that moment, be really involved with what they're saying, where they're coming from, and why they believe it, and follow up with the questions about those things if I don't feel like I got it. I think when we do that, it's a lot easier to exchange ideas, right? Because there's kind of an equal investment on both parties' part in the idea that the other person has ideas of value and is trying to express those.
Any last thoughts, Nolan or Stephen, at this point, since we are wrapping up? I do want to also thank everybody who was here and stayed all the way to the end. And I will put my email in the chat if you have additional questions or if you'd like to bring the Civility project to another group that you're part of. We are booking into 2022 right now, so we'd love to hear from you. But any last thoughts before we close for tonight, guys?
I just say this, try to break the habit of hating people you don't know based on your assumptions. And Steve and I get that all the time. People read or listen to us and say, oh, I just hate you, you know, because of your political views, and they don't know us. So try to break that habit if you're in it of saying, oh, I just hate that person because of the way they think politically.
Stephen, any last thoughts?
No, I think that's a good place to leave it.
Great. Well, Ashley, thank you for coordinating this, and thank you to everybody who was helping to sponsor and co-host. It's been such a delight to be with you guys, and we hope to get to Yuma at some point in person. So we'll keep our
We'll be
fingers crossed.
humans.
Yes.
With the humans. Thank you so much, everybody, again for joining, and we really appreciate you being here, and we hope you took something away from today. So, and we will definitely think about bringing you guys back in person.
Hey, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.